John Edward Robinson seemed like an ordinary man-a-father, a husband, and a church-going member of his Kansas community. But beneath his charming, business-savvy exterior lay a manipulative psychopath who spent decades deceiving, torturing, and killing his victims. Robinson's reign of terror began in the 1980s when he lured unsuspecting women into his twisted web through job offers and online BDSM chat rooms. Posing as a successful entrepreneur, he promised vulnerable women lucrative careers or thrilling romantic encounters, only to imprison them in a world of unspeakable horror. His first known victim was a young single mother named Paula Godfrey, whom he claimed to have hired for a business venture. She vanished without a trace, and when her worried parents contacted Robinson, he produced typewritten letters allegedly from Paula saying she had left for a new life. The letters were fake. Robinson had already killed her. But he was meticulous, covering his tracks so well that authorities couldn't pin the disappearance on him. Over the years, he continued his sinister routine, using fake job listings and promises of stability to lure desperate women. He would keep them in captivity, abusing and torturing them for his own sadistic pleasure before disposing of their bodies like garbage. One of his victims, Lisa Stassi, was a young mother who vanished in 1985. After her murder, Robinson forged adoption papers and gave her infant daughter to his own brother, convincing them it was a legal adoption. The baby grew up never knowing her real mother had been brutally murdered. Robinson continued his spree into the 1990s, refining his methods of deceit and murder. He used the internet to seek out lonely women, playing the role of a dominant, wealthy man in BDSM relationships. Many victims traveled from other states, believing they were starting a new life with him only to be met with chains, starvation, and violence. He kept some women alive for months before finally killing them, storing their remains in industrial barrels on his property. His crimes only unraveled when authorities noticed multiple missing women had one connection: John Robinson. In 2000, a police raid uncovered disturbing evidence on his farm, including human remains stuffed inside 55-gallon drums. He was arrested and later convicted for multiple murders. Sentenced to death, Robinson sits in prison to this day, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters were the most convincing masks.
Albert Fish was the kind of man parents should have feared. Behind his frail, elderly exterior lurked a predator who enjoyed the suffering of others, especially children. A cannibal, sadist, and torturer, Fish committed some of the most horrific crimes in history. Born in 1870, he spent much of his early life in orphanages, where he endured relentless beatings that he later admitted had given him pleasure. This twisted connection between pain and arousal would define his entire life. By adulthood, Fish had developed a fascination with extreme sadomasochism, inserting needles into his own groin and whipping himself until he bled. But his depravity didn't stop at self-inflicted pain. He set his sights on children. Fish traveled from state to state, preying on young boys and girls, luring them into his grasp with the promise of treats or money. One of his most infamous crimes involved a 10-year-old girl named Grace Budd. In 1928, Fish approached the Budd family under the guise of hiring their teenage son for farm work. Instead, he fixated on Grace. He gained the trust of her unsuspecting parents and convinced them to let him take Grace to a children's party. She never returned. What happened next was pure nightmare fuel. Fish later wrote a chilling letter to Grace's mother, detailing how he had taken the little girl to an abandoned house, stripped her naked, and strangled her. But he didn't stop there. He described, in graphic detail, how he had cooked and eaten parts of her body over several days, savoring the flesh of an innocent child. The letter led to his capture, and police soon uncovered even more horrors. Fish admitted to molesting and killing multiple children, using various torture methods, including whipping, burning, and cannibalism. His trial was one of the most shocking in history, and despite his insanity, he was sentenced to death. In 1936, he was executed in the electric chair, but even in his final moments, he showed no remorse, reportedly saying, "It will be the supreme thrill of my life." David Parker Ray was not your average serial killer. He was something far worse. A sadist, torturer, and kidnapper. He built a custom torture chamber that would make horror movies look tame in comparison. Inside his converted trailer, which he chillingly called his toy box, he carried out unspeakable acts on women, keeping them prisoner for days or even weeks before disposing of them. Ray spent years perfecting his methods, amassing an arsenal of whips, chains, surgical instruments, and even a gynecological chair equipped with restraints. His victims were drugged, stripped, and chained to the chair, where they were subjected to brutal physical and psychological torture. But Ray wasn't just a physical monster, he was a psychological one. Before beginning his torture sessions, he played pre-recorded audio tapes for his victims, calmly explaining that they were now his sex slaves, that they would never escape, and that they would be broken down mentally before he ultimately ended their lives. The cold, calculated nature of these tapes made it clear Ray wasn't just a killer, he was a methodical sadist who took pleasure in the suffering of others. Some victims were forced to endure his twisted experiments, while others were killed and discarded without a trace. For years, Ray evaded capture, carefully covering his tracks and ensuring no one could link him to the dozens of women who went missing. He might have continued indefinitely if it weren't for Cynthia Vigil, a woman who defied the odds. In 1999, Vigil was lured into Ray's torture trailer but managed to escape after days of horror. She ran, naked and covered in chains, to a neighbor's house, where she called for help. Her testimony led to Ray's arrest, and police uncovered his terrifying lair. Though no physical bodies were found, the evidence was overwhelming: journals detailing his crimes, his torture devices, and recordings of his sick fantasies. Investigators believe Ray may have killed over 60 women, but his true body count remains unknown. He was sentenced to 224 years in prison, but died of a heart attack in 2000 before he could serve his sentence. His story remains one of the most disturbing cases in criminal history, a man who turned his depraved fantasies into a living nightmare for his victims.